Right, so we got some pretty major updates coming out of Ukraine right now, where it appears like, at least according to the reports that we're about to get into here, that Vladimir Putin and his Russian forces currently continuing their ongoing offensive in Ukraine have been committing war crimes. So I want to get into the specifics of some of the recent things that we've been seeing, but understand, again, obvious reminder here, but this is an ongoing hot war between two industrialized, militarized countries. So a lot of this is really hard to parse through because you're having to deal with ongoing information warfare between both sides. But what I'm showing you guys here is, I'm pretty confident, accurate information, as well as being also a conservative estimate in terms of the actual civilian casualties that have been happening on the ground. So here, just to start us off, we got an Amnesty International report saying Russian military commits indiscriminate attacks during the invasion of Ukraine. So they say the Russian invasion of Ukraine has been marked by indiscriminate attacks on civilian areas and strikes on protected objects such as hospitals. Amnesty International said today, after documenting 3 incidents, that it believes to have killed at least 6 civilians and injured at least 12 more. Indiscriminate attacks violate international humanitarian law and can constitute war crimes. And they say, just in terms of how they went about this process, that Amnesty International's Crisis Evidence Lab analyzed digital evidence, including photos, videos, and satellite imagery of 3 such attacks carried out in the early hours of the Russian invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February. And the attacks occurred in Vuhledar, Kharkiv, and Uman. So again, they're talking about the 24th of February. So all 3 of these events were basically happening in the first stages of this invasion. And as we're going to get to after we read about these 3 specific incidents, because of how much Russia has failed essentially in what they planned would be a pretty easy conquering of Ukraine. They really thought that they were going to be able to do this in a couple days. And because of the fierce resistance that they have been facing, both from civilians that have taken up arms, as well as from the Ukrainian security forces that are continuing to get weapons from the West funneled into their country, basically because they have been stalled so much in this offensive, they are now starting to significantly escalate the offensive and are resorting to more indiscriminate ways of attacking civilian centers, like using reportedly cluster bombs and other things that are banned in urban warfare. So we're going to get to a couple other examples, but understand that these 3 are, again, pretty conservative estimates in terms of some of the destruction that we have been seeing since this initial invasion took place. So they start us off here with the first example, saying, in the deadliest strike documented by Amnesty International at approximately 10:30 a.m. local time, a ballistic missile struck near a hospital building in Vuhledar in the Donetsk region, eastern Ukraine, killing 4 civilians and wounding 10 more. And according to a local source who spoke to Amnesty International researchers, 2 women and 2 men were killed, and 6 healthcare workers were among the injured. And analyzing photos of the weapon scrap linked to the incident, Amnesty International's weapons investigator determined that a 9M79 Tochka ballistic missile was used in the attack. And they say these weapons are extremely inaccurate, regularly missing their targets by half a kilometer or more, and should never be used in populated areas. So that's just the first example. Another one, they say another one of the attacks was carried out at approximately 8 a.m. local time in the Kharkiv region, which is northeastern Ukraine territory, and has been one of the most significantly bombarded cities. It's the second most populous city in Ukraine, and we're going to get to a couple different examples of other bombings that have taken place in Kharkiv. But they say this one, the likely target was the nearby Chuhuiv, sorry if I'm completely butchering that, air base, but instead a Russian weapon struck a residential block, causing extensive fire damage and apparently killing at least 1 male civilian and injuring at least 2 civilian women. And they say a single large crater in the ground between apartment buildings indicates the weapon was most likely a single large missile or rocket. And finally, they say in another attack occurring at 7 a.m. on the 24th of February in Uman, a civilian man appears to have been killed by a strike that also damaged a nearby restaurant. So again, those are just 3 examples of what they claim to be verified war crimes that are targeting civilian infrastructure or heavily densely populated civilian areas, and it did actually result in civilian casualties. So again, these are pretty conservative based on some of the other videos and evidence that I've seen coming out more recently, but this is just in the first couple hours, in the first couple days of the attack, or literally just on the first day of this invasion. So we have more recent updates here. This this from The Guardian. They say horrendous rocket attack kills civilians in Kharkiv, again, that city in the northeastern part of Ukraine, as Moscow adapts its tactics. So again, they're referencing sort of this adaptation we've seen recently, especially in the last couple of days, where because their offensive was largely stalled, Russia is getting somewhat frustrated and is starting to resort to weapons that typically you wouldn't use in heavily populated civilian areas. So significant escalation from the Russian military recently, and they had a good map here that I think gives us a picture in terms of the updates and where the war stands right now. But they show down here, I think this is a little bit outdated because I do think they took the rest of this territory down here near Mariupol and basically cut Ukraine off from the Sea of Azov. But you can see here, I mean, they've been moving in through Ukraine to some major city centers. They were moving in obviously through the Donbass and the Donetsk and Luhansk regions over here in the east, and they were also moving in from the north through Belarusian territory into Ukraine. Neither Kiev or Kharkiv, as of right now that I'm making this video, has been successfully taken. Now that could change at any moment because both of these cities have been essentially under consistent bombardment, as well as a surrounding by Russian forces who are basically trying to completely cut them off from the rest of the country. So those are the two biggest civilian centers or biggest metropolitan areas that will be key to basically deciding who's going to end up winning this war. I mean, I don't want to, be too positive on the Ukrainian side. It's really just more of a matter of time than a matter of if Russia is going to successfully take these areas. It's, they're putting up a fierce fight. They're putting up a noble fight, but nonetheless, you're still dealing with a significant military advantage on the side of Russia. So that's the reality of the current situation on the ground. Now we get to a couple of video examples just to give you guys a perspective of how absolutely chaotic and terrible this is on the ground. So here's just first one from Giancarlo Fiorella. He says, some of the videos showing Russia's indiscriminate bombing of homes in Kharkiv today are too graphic to share here. Again, I have plenty of other videos I could be showing you guys, but obviously I don't want to show you extremely graphic footage of civilian deaths. But this one is not graphic while it's haunting in its own light. So you can see here, I think this is in the Kharkiv region, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, this is in Kharkiv. So again, that northeastern city that we were just looking at on the map there. But I mean, you can see here, this is just an apartment and you have like civilian cars here. These are not military vehicles, and you can even see here a sidewalk towards a little bit north here, and there are even civilians who are walking along this sidewalk that you can maybe make out here, but I'm just going to go ahead and play the video so you can see it, not with any sound. But these are some of the apparently cluster munitions that we have been seeing reports of, and you can obviously see why they're viewed as cluster munitions. You have these different bombs that are going off in smaller locations. So, I mean, essentially, the reason you don't use those in urban centers is for pretty obvious fucking reasons, right? They're not accurate. They're not precise. You're throwing them into a city center, and that could hit anything. I mean, literally, you can see people on the sidewalk here who are scrambling to get away and try to run away as they are actively being bombed. A couple civilian cars here got bombed. So that's just one example of some of the reports of cluster bombs, which are, again, supposed to be banned in urban warfares. Now, if you go and look at some of the previous like UN resolutions and security resolutions that have been put forward, you'll find only a couple of countries have actually fully accepted their banned use in warfare, and some of the countries that have not accepted their ban on the use of these types of weapons in warfare have been Russia, Ukraine, and the United States. So, take with that what you will, but nonetheless, civilian casualties, obviously something you want to avoid as much as possible. We also had this significant escalation in terms of weapons usage. This is again in the city of Kharkiv, and this is basically just a major government building. And again, I don't want to get too certain in my analysis that like, oh, this definitely killed civilians, or this definitely could be classified as a war crime. But just to give you a perspective in terms of how indiscriminate a lot of these bombs are, you'll see the missile is about to strike like roughly in this location, but I mean, there are civilian cars all over the fucking place driving around, people walking on the sidewalks, and you guys are going to see where the missile strikes roughly here. So yeah, pretty fucking gigantic missile there. Absolutely leveled and obliterated a huge portion of this massive building right here. Don't know if you'll be able to get a clear picture from it from right there. But again, escalating the types of weapons that they have been using. We also saw an apartment building in Kiev, which again, it's not just isolated to the eastern portions. It's not isolated to one city. It seems like a lot of these types of crimes have been pretty widespread in metropolitan areas, but here's just one example of a missile that we saw struck this apartment building in Kiev. So Yeah, I mean that's a war crime. It's pretty simple. That's a fucking war crime. If I would call it out when the United States does it, or when Israel does it in the Gaza Strip, or when any one of our allies in Saudi Arabia or whatever kills civilians in Yemen. You got to call it out across the board, right? If you're a critic of U.S. imperialism or U.S. war crimes, you should be just as critical of Putin's war crimes and Russian war crimes. It's all the same. They're all dick swinging, violent imperialists who are bringing us to the brink of war right now between the West and Russia. So it's a pretty alarming situation with this escalatory framing that we've been seeing here. But again, just brazen war crimes being committed here. And just another perspective on that building that was hit there in Kiev. They say here from Al Jazeera, Kiev residential tower hit by a missile as fighting rages. So again, all the different cities across the country. And this is a report that I haven't had complete confirmation of, but if this is confirmed, the cluster bombs I've seen pretty consistently confirmed, but the vacuum bombs, I think otherwise known as thermobaric bombs, are essentially the almost the worst type of bomb that you could use in warfare other than a nuclear bomb. Pretty violent and terrible. I don't know if they give an explainer in terms of what they do, but essentially they have initial blast radiuses and then they expand even further beyond that by basically igniting the air surrounding the target location. So if you happen to be somebody who is in the area of effect of a bomb like this when it lands, and if they are in fact using it, then again you could classify these as war crimes if they are hitting civilian centers. So again, at the end of the day, the message here is, if you consider yourself an anti-imperialist, if you consider yourself anti-war, if you consider yourself anti-capitalist, then what Vladimir Putin is doing right now, a capitalist oligarch who is violently expanding into different territories, trying to conquer a different sovereign country right now, regardless of what you think about the nuances in the Donetsk region, in the Luhansk region, in the overall arching Donbass region, and some of the oppression that Eastern Russians have been facing. Regardless of some of the arguments that you hear, or counter arguments, absolutely nothing justifies these types of actions, right? Absolutely nothing justifies Putin's violent imperial expansion right now. Nothing justifies war crimes. Nothing justifies killing innocent civilians, men, women, and children. And unfortunately, it seems like, again, because they've been successfully stalled by Ukrainian security forces, it seems like they are going to be entering a different phase in this war, where they are going to be much more willing to use these types of indiscriminate bombing campaigns and an all-out siege tactic warfare. So it's a pretty alarming situation, to say the least. And again, Putin is a violent imperialist war criminal. So let's condemn him just as equally and vociferously as we would condemn the United States empire.